Have you ever turned the key on a truck and thought, this thing might actually kill me? Maybe not literally, but your wallet, your schedule, your sanity, all fair game. Some truck engines weren't just bad, they were legendary disasters. Engines that caught fire, blew themselves apart, destroyed entire companies, and turned America against diesel for 30 years. Today, we're counting down the 20 deadliest truck engines ever built. These are the ones mechanics feared, owners cursed, and lawyers absolutely loved. We're talking massive recalls, billion-dollar lawsuits, and engines so terrible the government literally ordered them destroyed. If you enjoy this kind of content, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe, because we've got a lot of ground to cover. Let's get into it. Number 20, the Chevrolet S10, 2.2-liter four-cylinder. Picture this. It's the mid-90s, and you just bought a brand-new Chevy S10 pickup. You're a truck guy now. Then you try merging onto the highway, and nothing happens. The engine screams like it's being tortured, but the truck doesn't actually go anywhere meaningful. The 2.2-liter four-cylinder was essentially half a pushrod V8, crammed into a truck chassis, and it drove exactly like that sounds. There are documented stories of loaded S10s being outrun by Dodge Neons going up mountain passes on Interstate 40, not racing, just driving normally. The Neon wasn't even trying. Owners described the experience as somewhere between riding a lawnmower and operating a very loud paperweight. The 5-speed manual was decent enough, but none of that mattered when the engine couldn't haul anything heavier than a bag of groceries up a slight incline without screaming in protest. Chevy actually marketed this as a legitimate work truck. They ran commercials. They sold hundreds of thousands. And every single owner who tried to use one like an actual truck discovered the truth. This wasn't a truck engine. It was a cruel joke wearing a Chevy bow tie. General Motors eventually replaced it with better options, but the damage to the S10's reputation was already done. To this day, mention the 2.2 to anyone who owned one and watch their eye twitch. Number 19, the Dodge 3.7-liter Magnum V6. When Dodge put the 3.7 Magnum V6 into their trucks, they created a masterpiece of disappointment. 210 horsepower doesn't sound terrible for a V6, but this engine guzzled fuel like a V8 while delivering acceleration that made you wonder if the parking brake was still on. Worst of both worlds, perfectly executed. The real nightmare was what happened inside. Chronic valve seat failures became the 3.7's calling card. The valve seats would literally drop out of the cylinder head, causing catastrophic compression loss and turning a running engine into an expensive doorstop. Stuck hydraulic lifters created a symphony of clicking that owners learned to recognize as money evaporating. Oil consumption was so severe that many owners reported adding a full quart every 1,000 miles. That's not maintenance. That's a lifestyle. The engine ran excessively hot, which broke down oil faster, which accelerated wear, which created more heat. A self-destructing cycle wrapped in cast iron and sold as a truck engine. Dodge eventually moved on to better things, but for the truck owners who lived through the 3.7 era, the scars remain. Number 18. The Leyland 500 fixed-head diesel crossed the Atlantic to 1970s Britain, and you'd find what veteran lorry drivers still describe as one of the most miserable engines ever bolted into a heavy goods vehicle. The Leyland 500 fixed-head diesel earned its reputation through sheer, relentless awfulness. Mechanics despised it. Drivers dreaded it. The fixed-head design meant the cylinder head couldn't be removed for routine maintenance. When something went wrong inside, and something always went wrong, repairs were absurdly complicated and expensive. The Leyland Buffalo, which used this engine, was described as having the aerodynamics of a tower block and noise levels that could cause permanent hearing damage. The engine was routinely failing, and when it wasn't failing, It was rattling, overheating, or leaking fluids from places fluids shouldn't leak from. British trucking in the 70s was already tough business with poor roads and long hours. The 500 made it worse. Drivers lucky enough to escape a Buffalo and climb into a Volvo or Scania described the experience as being released from prison. This engine didn't just fail mechanically. It failed as a concept entirely. When production finally ceased in the late 70s, no one mourned its passing. Not the drivers, not the mechanics, and certainly not the fleet operators who had been hemorrhaging money trying to keep these things on the road. Number 17. The Caterpillar 3208 V8 diesel Caterpillar literally designed this engine to be thrown away. That's not an insult. That was the actual design philosophy. When Cat partnered with Ford in the early 1970s, one of the core design criteria was disposability. The engine had no cylinder liners, none. In most diesel engines, you pull out worn liners and replace them. Not here. Once the cylinder walls wore down, the engine was scrap, hence the nickname the throwaway engine. But Cat kept pushing the horsepower envelope, eventually turbocharging it up to 435 horsepower from a block originally designed for 210. At lower power ratings, the 3208 was reasonably reliable. At 435 horses, connecting rods had a nasty habit of exiting through the side of the block at 3,000 revolutions per minute. Excessive wrist pin bearing wear was the most common cause, and once a rod let go at full throttle, the engine became instant scrap, which, ironically, was exactly what Caterpillar planned from the beginning. The engine found its way into school buses, dump trucks, fishing boats, and dozens of other applications, spreading disposable engineering across every industry it touched. Over 1 million 3208 engines were produced before Caterpillar finally discontinued the platform in the early 90s due to tightening emissions regulations. It remains one of the most produced diesel engines in history, for better and for worse. Number 16. The General Motors 6.5-liter turbo diesel. In the early 90s, General Motors needed a diesel for their light trucks. What they delivered was a masterclass in mediocrity. The 6.5 turbo diesel was based on the older 6.2-liter that served adequately in military Humvees since 1982. The turbo version was supposed to be the upgrade everyone wanted. It wasn't. Producing an embarrassing 130 horsepower in early versions, this engine struggled to move even empty trucks. The real horror was the injection pump. The Stanodyne electronic injection pump became infamous for failing without warning, leaving owners stranded at the worst possible times. Harmonic balancer problems added anxiety because when the balancer failed, it could take the crankshaft with it. And the noise. The 6.5 rattled and vibrated like an industrial paint shaker from startup until it mercifully died, which was often sooner than expected. While Cummins was building loyalty and Ford was gaining ground with the Power Stroke, GM diesel owners were adding oil and crossing their fingers. The 6.5 achieved decent fuel economy when running properly. That qualifier did enormous heavy lifting. The truth is, the 6.5 rarely ran properly for very long. It was the engine equivalent of a participation trophy, present but never really contributing anything meaningful to the competition. Number 15. The Ford 3.5-liter EcoBoost First Generation. The name alone was marketing genius. EcoBoost. Sounds efficient, modern, futuristic. What it actually was in the 2010 through 2014 models was a ticking time bomb wrapped in brilliant branding. Timing chains stretched with alarming regularity, and when they went hard. Ford dealers reportedly stocked replacement parts the way grocery stores stock bread before a snowstorm. Just always ready. Carbon buildup from direct injection strangled the intake valves over time, and owners watched their trucks lose power gradually, then suddenly, then completely. But the most dangerous issue was intercooler condensation in 2011 and 2012 models. Under certain conditions, water accumulated and got ingested into the engine, causing terrifying power loss on a highway while towing, with your family in the truck. Ford eventually addressed these issues in later generations, but the first-generation EcoBoost taught a lot of truck owners that turbocharging and pickups don't always mix as smoothly as the commercials suggest. Number 14. The Detroit 6 V92 two-stroke diesel. If you've ever heard a Detroit two-stroke screaming down the highway, you never forget that sound. The 6 V92 was loud, smoky, desperately thirsty, and terrifying when things went wrong. Displacing 552 cubic inches across 6 cylinders in a V configuration, it used a blower-driven two-stroke design fundamentally different from conventional diesels. But the truly deadly characteristic was the runaway. A runaway diesel accelerates uncontrollably, consuming its own crankcase oil as fuel until it either runs dry, destroys itself, or someone physically blocks the air intake. There is no off switch. The engine just goes faster and faster. On worn engines that idled for extended periods, runaway events were alarmingly common. The result was usually spectacular bearing failure, followed by a connecting rod punching through the block like a fist through wet cardboard. Mechanics who worked on these engines have stories. Most involve running away from the truck while it screamed itself to death behind them. The fuel economy was also terrible, even when everything worked correctly, and the maintenance costs on these old two-strokes made them increasingly impractical as newer, cleaner, four-stroke technology became the standard. Number 13. The Ford 5.4-liter Triton V8. Ford built millions of Triton V8s, and a disturbing percentage developed what can only be described as a spark plug ejection problem. The spark plugs would violently blow themselves out of the aluminum cylinder head while running, stripping the threads and rocketing into the engine bay. This was so widespread that Ford developed specialized repair tools, and the aftermarket created entire product lines of thread repair kits for this one engine. The 3-valve version introduced in 2004 brought seized spark plugs that snapped during removal, leaving the bottom half trapped. Some mechanics spent 4 to 6 hours extracting a single plug. Beyond the spark plug drama, timing chain failures destroyed engines without warning. Owners would hear a distinctive ticking that grew louder, essentially the engine counting down to its own death. When the chain let go, valves met pistons in catastrophic collision. The 5.4 powered F-150s and Expeditions for over a decade, spreading misery with remarkable consistency. Number 12. The Caterpillar 3116 Diesel. The 3116 was the engine mechanics loved to hate, primarily because working on it required approximately $5,000 in specialized tooling available exclusively from Caterpillar. Timing the fuel system was so proprietary that independent shops couldn't do it, meaning every repair required an expensive trip to a Cat dealer. For fleet operators running dozens of trucks, this was a significant ongoing drain. Then there was the power problem, or rather, the absence of power. The 3116 was woefully underpowered compared to Cummins and international competitors. Where a 5.9 Cummins pulled loads with authority, the 3116 strained and struggled. Caterpillar designed it to be somewhat disposable, like the 3208 before it. The 3126 and later the C7 replaced it, and both were better engines. But for years, truck operators lived with an underpowered, expensive machine that seemed designed to generate dealer revenue rather than meaningful work. Number 11. The Cummins ISX early models. The ISX was supposed to be the next evolution of the legendary N14. Expectations were enormous, and it eventually became solid. But those early models were rough. The biggest problem was the camshaft. Cummins had issues with cam lobe coatings, and when they failed, the soft metal underneath wore rapidly, causing catastrophic cam bearing damage. This was a pull the engine, tear it down, replace everything kind of problem. Then there were occasional rod and crank failures. When a connecting rod left an early ISX, it did so dramatically, usually through the side of the block, often accompanied by a spectacular oil fire. Owner-operators who invested their savings into trucks with early ISXs faced repair bills exceeding the truck's value. Cummins eventually solved these problems, and later ISX engines earned a strong reputation. But the early adopters paid a steep price. In trucking, where every mile counts and downtime means lost income, the early ISX's issues weren't inconveniences. They were career threats. The irony is that the Cummins name had been built on the legendary reliability of the B-Series and the N14. Those engines ran for 1 million miles without breaking a sweat. The early ISX nearly destroyed that hard-earned reputation in a matter of years. Number 10. The PACCAR MX-13. On paper, the MX-13 looks like a winner. It powers Kenworth and Peterbilt trucks, producing up to 510 horsepower and 1,850 pound-feet of torque. For some operators, it's been reliable and efficient. For many others, it's been a nightmare. The diesel particulate filter is notorious for clogging, especially in trucks that idle frequently. Extended idle essentially kills the DPF, leading to constant regeneration cycles and expensive replacements. The selective catalytic reduction system adds complexity with doser valve failures, sensor malfunctions, and wiring harness problems. But the MX-13's deeper issues concern truck owners most. The rear gear train makes camshaft replacement extraordinarily labor-intensive. Diagnosing electronic problems requires PACCAR-specific software-independent shops lack. Replacement parts carry premium prices. The MX-13 has developed a reputation as a 500,000-mile engine, meaning major repairs arrive right at that milestone. In an industry where million-mile engines were once the gold standard, that's a tough sell. Number 9. The Ford 6.4-liter Power Stroke. The 6.4, produced from 2008 to 2010, was supposed to fix everything wrong with the 6.0. It had twin sequential turbochargers, was quieter, and made more power. It was also Ford's first diesel with a diesel particulate filter. That's where things went sideways. During regeneration, raw fuel injected into the exhaust washed past piston rings and diluted the engine oil, sometimes raising the level by several quarts. Contaminated oil doesn't protect anything, and accelerated wear destroyed bearings and rings from the inside out. The twin-turbo setup added enormous complexity. Stuck vanes and bearing wear required expensive service. Radiator mounting design allowed flexing with the chassis, leading to cracks and coolant loss that silently overheated the engine. Perhaps most alarming was the fire risk. Documented cases exist of 6.4 turbos literally catching fire while hauling heavy loads on the interstate, with oil igniting on superheated exhaust components. Ford only made this engine 3 model years before replacing it. Those 3 years were more than enough. The 6.4 earned such a terrible reputation that used truck buyers actively avoid them, and the resale value on these trucks has plummeted far below what comparable trucks with other engines command on the used market. Number 8. The Navistar MaxxForce 15. The MaxxForce 15 holds a special place in diesel history because it was discontinued after only 1,400 units were built. Navistar pulled the plug so fast, some dealers barely had time to sell trucks already on their lots. Like the MaxxForce 13, Navistar insisted on using exhaust gas recirculation alone to meet EPA 2010 standards, while every other manufacturer adopted selective catalytic reduction. The EGR system generated enormous heat that overwhelmed cooling components. Valve shaft failures were common and expensive. The cooling system added weight, complexity, and failure points. Fuel economy was atrocious because the EGR consumed so much energy managing its own heat. The engines were tightly packaged, making simple maintenance into multi-hour ordeals. After 1,400 engines and a tsunami of warranty claims, Navistar replaced the 15 with a Cummins ISX option, one of the fastest retreats in diesel engine history. The trucks that were already in service with this engine lost most of their resale value almost overnight once the news spread that Navistar had killed the program. Number 7. The Caterpillar C-15 ACERT late emissions models. This one hurts because the C-15 was legendary. Earlier versions were million-mile engines with 600 horsepower potential from simple computer tweaks. Truckers worshipped them. Then emissions regulations arrived and everything changed. The late ACERT models, particularly 2007 and 2008 engines, were a different animal entirely. DPF systems clogged constantly. Trucks shut down on highways because they couldn't complete regeneration cycles. Twin-turbo configurations with frame-mounted burner boxes were problematic and expensive. Owners who trusted the Cat name faced the same nightmares plaguing every manufacturer. But for Cat, the damage was existential. They couldn't solve the emissions puzzle, and in 2008 announced they were leaving the on-highway truck engine market entirely. The company that built some of the most iconic truck engines in history simply walked away. The late ACERT models didn't just fail as engines, they ended an era. They killed Cat trucking forever. And for thousands of owner-operators who had planned to run Cat power for the rest of their careers, the loss was deeply personal. Those pre-emission C-15s are now some of the most sought-after engines in the used truck market, commanding premium prices that would have been unthinkable when they were new. Number 6. The General Motors L87 6.2-liter V8. This one is recent. In 2025, GM issued a recall affecting nearly 600,000 trucks and SUVs equipped with this engine. The L87 powers Silverados, Tahoes, Suburbans, Sierras, Yukons, and Escalades. Manufacturing defects in connecting rods and crankshafts caused catastrophic engine failure while driving. GM identified over 28,000 complaints, with 14,000 involving complete power loss. 12 crashes, 12 injuries, and 42 fires were documented. Some failures occurred without warning on low-mileage vehicles. You'd be cruising along, then suddenly a loud bang, a check engine light, and a truck coasting to a dead stop in traffic. Investigators found intermittent quality issues during manufacturing caused rod-bearing damage and out-of-spec crankshaft dimensions. For a premium lineup starting above $50,000, this kind of failure destroys brand loyalty overnight. Notification letters were expected to be mailed in mid-2025, but for many owners, the trust was already broken long before the official paperwork arrived. Number 5. The Navistar MaxxForce 7. The MaxxForce 13 and 15 devastated trucking. The MaxxForce 7 devastated something more important: children. This engine was widely used in school buses across America, and it broke down constantly. Mike Wagner, running Lakeview bus lines transporting thousands of children daily in Chicago, described buses breaking down while full of kids, in the dead of winter, with no heat. He eventually got rid of every MaxxForce bus, gave some away, donated others. The engines couldn't complete their routes reliably. EGR coolers failed within 150,000 miles on nearly every engine. Some didn't last 7,000. Check engine lights illuminated constantly. engines derated or shut down while carrying students. Unlike trucking, where breakdowns mean financial loss, a school bus breakdown means children stranded and potentially in danger. Some bus companies lost millions. Others went bankrupt entirely. Number 4. The Ford 6.0-liter Power Stroke. Mention the 6.0 to any diesel mechanic and you'll get either a knowing laugh or an involuntary shudder. Produced from 2003 to 2007 by Navistar for Ford, this became the most notorious diesel in light truck history. The oil cooler clogged with debris. When it failed, the EGR cooler overheated and failed next, sending coolant into the exhaust. Then head gaskets blew because 4 torque-to-yield bolts per cylinder couldn't handle diesel compression. Injectors failed regularly. The fuel injector control module died when voltage dipped slightly. The variable geometry turbo stuck. The snap-to-connect fittings on 2005 through 2007 models had a reported 100% failure rate. An entire aftermarket industry emerged around bulletproofing these engines, meaning spending thousands replacing everything Navistar got wrong. The bitter irony is that a properly bulletproofed 6.0 is actually very capable. You just have to replace most of it first. The 6.0 is estimated to have cost Ford hundreds of millions in warranty repairs and buybacks, and it permanently damaged the Power Stroke brand name for nearly a decade until the 6.7 finally restored consumer confidence. Number 3. The Navistar MaxxForce 13. The MaxxForce 13 nearly destroyed Navistar. $135 million class action settlement, $52 million EPA fine, $30 million fraud verdict, SEC lawsuit against the former CEO. Half the company's market share evaporated. When every manufacturer adopted selective catalytic reduction for EPA 2010 standards, Navistar insisted EGR alone would work. They were catastrophically wrong. EGR coolers failed within 150,000 miles on nearly every engine. Some lasted under 7,000. Turbochargers failed. DPFs clogged. Engines derated or died on highways. One company lost over 150 days of revenue on just 14 trucks. A former executive testified certain model years were never tested. Navistar burned through stockpiled emissions credits, selling engines that never met the standards they were certified for. 66,000 trucks were sold with these engines. Every one was a liability. The debacle cost Navistar its independence, leading to acquisition by Volkswagen's Traton Group for $3.7 billion. The MaxxForce 13 didn't just fail, it rewrote the rulebook on how badly a single-engine program can go wrong. Number 2. The General Motors Oldsmobile 5.7-liter diesel V8. The engine that single-handedly destroyed America's relationship with diesel passenger vehicles for 30 years. In the late 70s, GM converted the Oldsmobile 350 gasoline V8 into a diesel. The conversion was rushed, underfunded, and compromised by cost-cutting executives who overruled engineers. The most catastrophic shortcut was keeping gasoline spec head bolts for an engine operating at 3 times the compression ratio. Bolts stretched, bolts snapped, head gaskets blew, engines self-destructed with stunning regularity. GM also eliminated the fuel-water separator to save a few dollars per unit, causing corroded injector pumps everywhere. One engineer who objected was forced into early retirement. GM sold approximately 129,000 in 1978 alone, putting them into cars, trucks, and Cadillacs. Up to a quarter suffered major failures. California couldn't certify the engine because all 9 test cars broke down before testing finished. The Lemon Law was born largely because of this engine. GM fixed it by '81, but the damage was permanent. America swore off diesel cars for a generation. That gap in diesel adoption traces directly to one cost-cutting decision at General Motors. While Europe embraced diesel cars and enjoyed their fuel savings for decades, American consumers wanted nothing to do with compression ignition in their passenger vehicles. And it all started right here, with one rushed, underfunded engine from Oldsmobile. Number 1. The Navistar MaxxForce Complete Engine Program. The number 1 spot belongs to the entire MaxxForce program because no engineering decision in diesel trucking history caused more widespread destruction. From 2008 through 2014, Navistar produced MaxxForce 7, 9, 10, 11, 13, and 15-liter engines with fundamentally flawed EGR systems. Every engine shared the same problem: excessive heat that overwhelmed cooling systems and destroyed components. The damage is staggering. $135 million in class action settlements, $52 million in EPA fines. Navistar was caught misrepresenting 7,700 engines to dodge emissions rules. Small businesses went bankrupt. School bus fleets crumbled. Drivers reported noxious fumes migrating into their cabs. The program cost Navistar half its market share, triggered SEC fraud investigations, and led to CEO Daniel Ustian facing federal allegations. It resulted in Navistar losing its independence to Volkswagen's Traton Group for $3.7 billion. And the engines themselves? The EPA settlement required Navistar to physically destroy older MaxxForce engines. The government demanded they be erased from existence. In the entire history of American trucking, no engine program has ever been more comprehensively, more spectacularly deadly. And that is why it sits at number 1, the 20 deadliest truck engines ever built. From spark plugs launching into engine bays to engines so bad the government ordered them destroyed, these power plants represent the absolute worst the trucking world has produced. Which one have you had the misfortune of dealing with? Drop your horror stories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this countdown, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.